So now I want to talk about the first part of the renovation process of this motorhome. When I bought this thing, I could tell it had been used. It had been stored outside, which you never want to do with any of these motorhomes, and I could tell it had had some damage on it. It had some damage in the rear corner where it had swung wide and nailed a power pole, but also when I went inside, I could tell right from the get-go it had had some water damage, and this is before I even purchased it, so I knew it had a little bit of water damage coming into it. But the inside of the motorhome was still pretty solid. It had a great layout, had a great rear bedroom, great overhead bed. Obviously, being the C5500 chassis and a Duramax was the biggest thing on that. So day one and day two, I started tearing this thing apart. And my first thought was I want to start tearing into the cab over because I knew that's where the actual water damage was. So I started pulling apart the cabinetry, I started lifting up the frame, and I started pulling off the individual paneling inside the cab over. I then discovered a significant amount of water damage. The water damage I discovered was all in the base of the cab over here. And the entire interior panel that was on the underside of the cab over bed was completely rotted. So I had to take the whole subframe for the bottom part of the cab over out so I could reskin it. And to reskin that, I had to get a whole new piece of Phylon exterior fiberglass sheathing so that way I could skin it, reinforce the frame, and then put the skin on the frame, adhere it, and get it ready to put back in. During this process, I also want to start tearing apart the back of the motorhome. The back of the motorhome it's a rear bedroom motorhome, but ultimately I'm going to turn this thing into a toy hauler. And the back of the motorhome was originally a rear bedroom. And it had a giant basement storage area underneath, which was great because it meant that I could take apart the entire rear bedroom and make it into my garage. I start taking the rear bedroom apart, and I see as I'm pulling screws out, they're rusted and stuff. And then I start pulling off the wall pieces, and the wall pieces are completely delaminating as they're coming apart. There's water damage. And as I pull more of the wall paneling off, I see more and more and more water damage. Till eventually I get to the point where on about day 4, I can tell basically the entire back wall of the motorhome is completely rotted out. Now, the way this motorhome is constructed is not very well built from the factory. They have this fiberglass exterior, but this fiberglass exterior is adhered to plywood paneling underneath, which means that even though it looks like we have fiberglass on the outside, directly beneath it is wood paneling. And these motorhomes, this one in particular, has seams all around the outside, and those seams are only held together with caulking. And over years of being stored outside, that caulking is dried out and has caused water to seep in between all the seams in the front and the back. The front and the back is where they usually get the worst. But I kind of have a feeling there's going to be some damage along the top seam all the way down here. So through day 4 was basically disassembly of the motorhome. Disassembling the back room, pulling the paneling off the inside, pulling all the framing out for the rear bed, and discovering pretty much that I'm going to have to rebuild the entire back wall, which, as it turns out, is okay because since my plans were to put a ramp in the back to make the back room a garage, having to disassemble the whole wall is actually okay for me because since I'm going to put a giant door back there anyway, a lot of the wall would have to get disassembled. The only difference is now I'm going to go with a much bigger door than I'd really planned with because now I have to literally pull all the skin off the back wall and the ladder and everything. So that takes me through day 4, and I'm going to continue with updates on the build process as I start putting pieces together and putting together the cab over bed as we work forward.